Plant-based eating is on trend and has been for some time. Fueled by health, environmental and ethical personal choices, we are seeing more people than ever adopt this way of eating. But there is no one right way to eat. And even within a framework of mostly plants, it is possible to do it well and not so well. In this podcast, I'll look at the latest research comparing different types of plant-based diets to ones that include meat and see how they compare on the nutrient wins and losses scoreboard. Vegan and vegetarian diets are definitely on trend, with these two terms the most popular searched for diets on Google in the last 2 decades. And the word diets here also encompasses way of eating, not just weight loss. Both these diets fall under the umbrella of plant-based, which isn't always a helpful term, as it doesn't tell you what foods it may include outside of pure plants, as some animal-based foods can be eaten on occasions, and a person still consider themselves plant-based. But that aside, a plant-based diet has a lot going for it on the health front, with such diets linked with a lower risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and some types of cancer, as well as greater longevity. A vegan diet is one of the many popular types of vegetarian diets. It is one that is easy to define as well, with only plant foods eaten, while dairy, fish, eggs, and meat are off the menu. Some people following a vegan diet may choose to exclude honey because it is a product of an animal, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole debate in this podcast. For those contemplating a vegan-style diet, it pays to be well prepared to ensure you meet all your body's nutritional needs. The good news about a vegan diet is that with good planning, it can meet the nutritional needs of almost anyone. But taking a step back to more plant-based diets in general, how do they fare as far as overall nutrient quality goes? And what sort of shortcomings could they have for people to be aware of to help them circumvent it? While plant-based diets are considered healthier, they need to be balanced and diverse to provide the right amount of nutrients daily required for a healthy life. Previous scientific reviews into this topic have suggested that people who follow a vegetarian or vegan diet may have a higher risk of vitamin B12, vitamin D, iron, zinc, and calcium deficiency, as these micronutrients can mostly be found in animal foods, or they have a lower bioavailability in plant foods. Further, the intake of long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids such as eicosanoic pentanoic acid, or EPA, and docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA, which are mainly present in fish and seafood, is commonly inadequate in people following mostly plant-based diets. So the latest step in looking at how a whole range of diets that fall under the umbrella of plant-based fare as far as nutrient needs go has just been published. It was a systematic review that included 141 observational and intervention studies from Europe, Southeast Asia, and North America. So it certainly had a more global flavour to the study as far as all of the different types of populations that were included. In all cases, the participants in each study were voluntarily following a self-selected diet, so they inserted their own definition of what plant-based meant for them. Studies on highly restrictive plant-based diets, such as raw food diets, were excluded, as to diets designed to reduce specific non-communicable diseases. All participants were 18 years or older, and women who were pregnant or lactating, people with specific diseases, and athletes were excluded. So the study was mostly about the general healthy population and what they were eating. And I'll link to this study in the show notes. Now, in the study, most of the diets that people labelled as plant-based were vegetarian or vegan. The comparison diet in the studies were people who included meat in their diet. First of all, protein. Protein intake was lower in people following vegan or a vegetarian diet compared to meat eaters, but was well within the recommended intake levels. Now, this is a pretty well-known finding, and it doesn't mean that a plant-based diet is protein deficient, only that if you are following a plant-based diet and have higher protein needs, such as an athlete in training, then you may need to pay more attention to this nutrient. And check out my prior podcast, episode number 74, where I look more closely at plant protein and muscle gains in athletes. And let's look at the nutrients that the review found were likely to be lower in people following a plant-based diet. And they were vitamin B12, vitamin D, iron, zinc, iodine, and calcium, as well as people following this diet had a lower turnover of bone markers. So this is compared to the meat eaters. So they generally had higher amounts of these types of nutrients, which again is not so surprising because many of these nutrients are predominantly found in in animal-based foods. And it was people following a vegan diet who had the lowest vitamin B12, calcium, and iodine intake, as well as a lower iodine status and lower bone mineral density. And surprisingly, while a vegan diet was certainly favourable for its fibre content, what was classified more broadly as vegetarian diets had a higher chance of actually being lower in fibre, which was a similar case to the diets of meat eaters. But if you look further at meat eaters, it wasn't all smooth sailing. They are at risk of inadequate intakes of fibre, as I just mentioned, but also polyunsaturated fatty acids, folate, vitamin D, vitamin E, calcium, magnesium, and alpha-linoleic acid, which is an essential omega-3 fatty acid found mostly in plant foods. So all of the dietary patterns had evidence of nutrient inadequacies. But none of these findings I've covered means that every person following each diet had the same nutrient profile, only that on average some nutrients were more likely to be well represented or less common in certain dietary patterns. And that's an important point because, like sugar is 100% vegan, but if your version of a vegan diet was full of highly processed foods and loads of added sugar, then you can't really expect that great health outcomes. And that was the clear but very unsurprising finding of a recent observational study on plant-based dietary patterns and health, where plant-based diets were grouped into healthy and unhealthy. And here, a healthy plant-based diet featured lots of whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, vegetable oils, and tea and coffee. And this sort of dietary pattern was linked to much more favourable outcomes on the risk of earlier death and the risk of cardiovascular disease, compared to people who were also eating a plant-based diet, but it was labelled as unhealthy. And this type of diet featured lots of fruit juices, sugar-sweetened beverages, refined grains, and sweets and desserts. And I'll link to this study in the show notes. So yes, the findings here of this latest research pretty much state the obvious, but it is an important signpost to not get sucked into the plant-based marketing spin of foods that are still pretty damn average for their nutritional merits. So let's give a quick summary of the nutrients to look out for if you're following a predominantly plant-based diet that is aligning more closely with a vegan diet. The 4 important ones are iron, vitamin B12, calcium, and omega-3 fatty acids. Iron in plant foods is not as well absorbed as that found from animal foods. So people following a vegan diet need almost double the recommended amount of iron compared to non-vegetarians. Good plant sources of iron include foods such as legumes, tofu, nuts and seeds, quinoa, dried fruits, and dark green leafy vegetables. And having a vitamin C rich food, such as citrus fruits or broccoli with meals, will help improve iron absorption. Now, vitamin B12 is also a significant nutrient of concern for people following a vegan diet, as it's generally only found in animal foods. Vitamin B12 is important for nerve transmission and blood cell formation. Eating foods that are labelled as fortified with vitamin B12, such as some soy milks, is one way to get additional B12 in your diet. or give some close thought to taking a vitamin B12 supplement and have your doctor keep an eye on your blood levels. Calcium can be another nutrient of concern because of the absence of dairy foods in a vegan diet. Calcium is important not just for bone health, but for vascular, muscle, and nerve function. Good plant-based sources of calcium include calcium-fortified soy or almond milk, tofu soaked with calcium sulfate, almonds, and green leafy vegetables. And the final one are the omega-3 fatty acids, which are essential for our immune system because we cannot make them. They are required in our diet. With fish off the menu for a vegan diet, then plant sources such as walnuts, flax seeds, canola oil, chia seeds, or soybean oil can go some way to meeting a person's needs. And you could also consider taking a vegan omega-3 supplement, which is sourced from a marine algae rather than fish. So let's wrap all this up. As with any dietary pattern, a plant-based diet can be healthy or unhealthy depending on the types of nutrient-rich or nutrient-poor foods eaten. With some awareness and good planning, a plant-based diet can meet a person's nutrient needs throughout their life and give a host of health benefits to boot. So that's it for today's show. You can find the show notes either in the app you're listening to this podcast on if it supports it, or else head over to my webpage at thinkingnutrition.com.au and click on the podcast section to find this episode to read the show notes. If you find this podcast of value, then please consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues, or maybe even leave a review. This all helps increase the ranking and reach of the podcast, which means a big win for credible, evidence-based nutrition messages while helping to dilute out the crazy and making the world a slightly less confusing place. I'm Tim Crow, and you've been listening to Thinking Nutrition.